Hello, gringos y gringas, beaners and beanerettes. Welcome back to El Racist Latino. I am your host, Rafael Contreras. You can all call me Rafa. My friends call me Rafa. And today we're creating a new segment. Let's see. I just had this inspiration. And it's no research, no searching, no rabbit holes. We are just going to listen to an interview, a debate, whichever podcast, and then analyze it or watch it together. Today we are for our very first podcast breakdown segment. We are gonna talk about the Glenn Diesen podcast. He's interviewing Yang, this Chinese professor that has also a pretty cool podcast. I will show you all of that and we'll speak a little bit about both guys before we jump in the interview. And I haven't seen this one. I just find the subject interesting. It's about signals of World War III coming. And let me make the first and most important disclaimer. I do not this to inflict fear into... Is the microphone a bit low? I do not this to inflict fear into anybody. It is not my intention to make everybody scared for no reason. The reason that I do this research, I understand many people say they don't watch the news because it's all depressive and makes me sad and all that stuff and black pill, whatever. I get that part, but I see it as a means of getting prepared. And the reason why I found this particular conversation interesting is because I got a feedback actually, thank you, that I should not touch this. It's annoying for the headphones, so I will do my best, but it's just a reflex. Anyway, so the reason that I'm doing this is just so we are prepared in case something happens. We all, of course, hope that nothing happens. We all, of course, hope that we all have peace, prosperity, and that everybody loves each other, understands each other, and then that we try to deal with conflicts like civilized people and not like animals. So in the case that happens, though, in the case that things keep going the way they are going, then we can prepare for it, make decisions, maybe get some food ready depending geographically where you are. And that's one of the things we're going to figure out hopefully today, where is the which part of the world are safe, which not, etc. So it's mostly about that. I'm not here to inflict any kind of fear or on anyone on purpose. I guess it's scary what we're gonna sorry, give me a second. So thanks. So I guess it's scary what we're gonna listen to. I'm sure it's gonna be a bit scary sometimes, but we're gonna have to try to not listen to this with emotional arguments, but always with facts and with the mentality or the mindset of preparing for these potential events. And it's like insurance. If you don't need it, great. If you need it, it's better to have it. So let's start. As I said, we're listening to the Glenn Diesen pod, which is pretty cool. I recommend you all to subscribe and like his videos and stuff. Oh, I forgot to do that about myself, man. You see? So please like, comment, share, give me your opinion about the podcast, my podcast, and this one that we're gonna listen to. And I am still gonna go live, by the way. This kind of segments, these podcast breakdowns are not gonna be released live. I'm always gonna record them, and I am not planning that to interrupt with my regular news updates, which today is gonna be Thailand and Cambodia, the conflict between Thailand and Cambodia. So I'm doing a lot of content today, and I actually have another interview that I saw, a debate actually in Piers Morgan about the war in Venezuela. So I think I'm gonna do another podcast breakdown tomorrow about that, as well as talk about Burkina Faso. Lots of content. I hope I don't get dismotivated. So yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe. Please comment. It helps with the algorithm. Just a quick like. If you didn't subscribe yet, of course, subscribe. If you already subscribed, thank you very much. And please like, give me a comment. Even if it's hate, even if, oh, you suck, whatever. It doesn't matter. Helps with the algorithm. So, yeah, comment. Anyway, so again, we come back here. And as I said, the Glenn Diesen podcast is a professor of Russian international affairs. Talking about the Russian international affairs, I understand that we're not going to agree with everything. I don't know if these guys, if this is the interview, by the way, and I don't know if they are like pro Russia, pro Ukraine, pro Venezuela, pro America, pro Israel. I don't know any of that. I have an idea, but because I've seen Glenn Diesen other things, and Professor Yang, I haven't seen his content, but he has a really cool podcast. Also recommend Predictive History, a lot of subs, and he has this kind of secret history thing that I just ended, 1.5 hour each episode. It seems super interesting. I just don't have the time right now. All of the podcasts I'm listening to is news and I don't have time for a hobby podcasts, which is what this is basically. Super interesting secret history, how power works, how societies collapse, death by whatever, meritocracy, the big Greek civilization. So it's, I think, 20, 27, 28 episodes on the secret history of the world. Interesting shit. So I recommend that one. But let's
Welcome. Today we are
stop talking bullshit and get to it. So, in this podcast, Professor Xueqin Jiang argues that both historical patterns and game theory can be used to accurately predict future events. Professor Yang is the host of the popular educational channel Predictive History, which of course I assume is about predicting history, right? Common sense. Not so common sometimes, but we make it. Anyway, yeah, let's do it.
we are joined by Professor Jiang, who is very famous for geopolitical forecasts based on game theory, and not looking into a crystal ball, but analyzes the structural forces and the interest of the various actors. So making some very specific predictions as well. For example, the return of Trump, also the US-Iran war in the second term of Trump. Anyways,
the return of Trump wasn't the most difficult prediction to make, to be honest.
Depends
when he said it, right?
For coming back on.
Thanks, Glenn.
So I guess one of the darker predictions of yours is that we are now well on our way to World War III. I just wanted to ask why this is. What are you looking at? Is this possible triggers? Do you look at the chain reactions? Because, well, as we saw from the previous two world wars, one thing tends to lead to another, and one gets sucked in, and there doesn't seem to be a reverse button at any point. So what is it that you're assessing?
Okay, so my first piece of evidence is the American National Security Strategy, which was just published 1 or 2 weeks ago, and it's very clear in that America, maybe 4 years ago, saw the world as possibly being organized and coordinated by multilateral organizations. What's important was for America to be the enforcer or the police officer to ensure that people abide by the rules-based national order. And in this document, Trump is very clear. This order has dissipated. It's gone. And so now that the only thing that matters is national self-interest. So America needs to protect its own national self-interest. And that primarily means protecting the Western Hemisphere, what they call the Monroe Doctrine. There's something called a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which is to say that Trump will want to enforce the Monroe Doctrine. America believes that Russia and China have been encroaching too deeply into South America, especially China.
I don't know what he means by minimal doctrine, though. What does that mean? Let's Google it. Why not? Let's Google. Minimal doctrine refers to the legal principle of the minimis non curat lex. The law doesn't concern itself with trifles, meaning trivial matters aren't legally actionable. applying in areas like copyright, trade, or general legal disputes. I think this is more relevant. It can also relate to judicial minimalism, where courts avoid board rulings, focusing on case facts to avoid complex political issues. And in religion, yeah, this makes more sense. Okay. It's basically like, yeah, not micromanaging.
China, which has a lot of trade
Legally.
investment agreements with South America to the benefit of the people there. But America has always believed that South America is American territory, and so now it will protect its territory, and that's why we are seeing the escalation.
Yeah, we learned about that yesterday, right? Jesus, sorry. We learned about yesterday, right? The Monroe Treaty, the Monroe Principle, whatever they want to call it, which basically means that the West Hemisphere belongs to the Americans. And it's just a treaty they made with themselves. Or Monroe, maybe some French dude, one of the colonizers, is like, yeah, this is all ours because yes. Okay, cool.
In Venezuela, we're seeing 10% of America's naval assets consolidate in the Caribbean. And recently, there's been escalation. American forces have basically stolen a Venezuela oil tanker and diverted it to Houston, Texas. So America, by enforcing the Monroe Doctrine, this means that America will now
Mineral
come to conflict with the entirety of South America.
Is that mineral doctrine or minimal doctrine? What the hell is a seriously? Mineral. You gotta be really nuanced about this kind of stuff. The mineral doctrine refers to legal principles governing land. Legal principles governing land use when mineral rights like oil, gas, coal, etc. are separated from surface rights, traditionally making the mineral state dominant, allowing necessary surface for extraction. Key doctrines include the dominant state doctrine, granting broad surface use for mining, and the accommodation doctrine, which limits this by requiring mineral owners to accommodate existent and significant surface uses if alternatives are available without undue burden. So basically it's pushing to extract more oil, gas, coal, etc.
Because when America is now threatening Venezuela, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, they all see their sovereignty being infringed upon. So that's one piece of evidence. The second piece of evidence is, of course, what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. This war between Russia and Ukraine is essentially over. Russia is dominating the battlefield. The morale in Ukraine has collapsed. There's about 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers who have deserted. There are millions who have fled abroad. So Ukraine doesn't have the manpower, nor the resources, nor the willpower to continue this fight. At the same time, the Europeans insist that the Ukrainians continue to fight. So there's talk among the Europeans of confiscating, stealing those 210 billion euros that it has from Russian assets and giving it directly to Ukraine. It's given up this idea because they understand it's suicidal, and so now they're about to give Ukraine 100 billion euros in loans and interest-free loans to continue this war. And the reason why is that Europe needs to enter this war at some point, and it's afraid that if there's a peace treaty, then Russia will be able to consolidate its gains and then use Ukrainian resources to challenge European supremacy. So that's the second major front. Then, of course, what we're seeing in the Middle East is a continuing escalation.
How? I mean, he says he's not saying this is the facts. He says that's what the West believes. Which I don't think it's. Yeah, this is one of the arguments with the pro-Russian, or the people that support Russia or against Ukraine or whatever, is that Putin has never said that he wants to go deeper into Europe, and that's true. Actually, in one of his last speeches he gave, he said, all these people that think that I want to go into Poland, I don't know where they get this idea. They don't really care about NATO or EU territory. Just want to figure this shit out in Ukraine. So could that be a lot of fear-mongering? Yeah, so that, like, to put the push on helping them. Like, oh, if Ukraine falls, the West is gonna fall, which I think it's over. Yeah, it's a hyperbole, 100%. That's my opinion.
Between Israel and Iran. So there was a peace treaty signed between Israel and different parties, Hamas, Hezbollah.
Oh man,
Peace
this
treaty
guy, this
signed.
guy is fucking going Venezuela, Ukraine, Palestine, and we're actually stopping right on time before he changes the subject. It happened twice already.
Middle East is a continuing escalation between Israel and Iran. So there was a peace treaty signed between Israel and different parties, Hamas, Hezbollah. It seems as though Israel has no respect for these treaties. It seems as though that Israel is planning to attack Hezbollah in Lebanon in the next 2 weeks. The Hamas peace treaty will not hold because Hamas will not.
He said that Israel is planning to attack Hamas and Hezbollah in 2 weeks. Well, they just killed one of the Hamas leaders in Gaza. So, like, that's how the ceasefire was broken. Hezbollah, well, they have been bombing Lebanon non-stop, so I don't know what's the difference. Actually, yeah, since the Beeper attack, Hezbollah has been quite weakened. So I guess they're just putting the boot on the neck to make sure they don't get stronger.
Agree to give up all its arms, because if it does so, then it will be wiped out by these Israeli proxies. So the Middle East will only flare up. There was this shooting
we
in
know.
America of this nuclear physicist, and then there was this tragedy on Bonny Beach in Sydney in Australia, where
yeah, I heard about that. Some nuclear physicist got shot in his apartment. He apparently created he was revolutionized nuclear fusion and shit, and killed. And yeah, Bondi Beach, we also spoke about that a couple of days ago. Terrible.
where 16 people died, and Israel is pinning the
15 or
blame on
16.
Iran with absolutely no evidence. There are these Mossad officers who've flown to Australia to participate in the investigation.
Oh yeah, that's another news about Bondi Beach, that now Mossad has been giving 100% charge of the case, which, as I said, kind of makes sense since it's against Jewish people. However, like what if they planned it? Yeah, this is the thing. They're gonna cover up their own I don't know. I think Australia should have also, or the local police should also have a say. Not like, oh, here's all the documents and bye. That's yeah. You cannot monopolize the investigation like that. It just takes you everywhere. It takes you to all the conspiracies. It makes you ask a million questions. None of them they can answer because it's, confidential or whatever excuse. So, dude, don't do this kind of stuff. It makes you look bad. Don't give the operation 100% to Mossad and then, yeah, there's other things to do. That shouldn't work like that either.
You can suspect that they will blame Iran in some way for what has happened.
Oh yeah, obviously.
So all around the world, we're seeing the potential for massive flare-ups in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems like one of the major things which are changing, which you suggested as well,
He
is
skipped
the
Cambodia and
change of the
Thailand.
entire world order, though. But usually a new world order
Yeah.
would only consolidate itself after a world war. That is, if you have massive distribution of power, there's often little ability of the international system to reform itself. Usually we need a big war, and then a new status quo can be cemented in agreements. But this is such a critical time, it seems, because the whole world order after the Cold War, again, has been based on hegemony, dominance. And now, of course, that distribution of power is gone. It is a multipolar distribution of power. So it's very near impossible to transition peacefully, though, because the old war, which was based on US primacy, now needs to find a whole new system on a balance of power. I mean, this changes absolutely everything. The rules of the games change, as you suggested. Why the US says now China and Russia can't be in its backyard, but the US, of course, can still be in the backyard of Russia and China. So there's no acceptable rules. The institutions will change. The security, should it still be based only on deterrence and dominance? If there's now many centers of power, it doesn't really make sense. How diplomacy is conducted. I just feel like this is very difficult topics, but no one seemed willing to accept the reality or even discuss it. I mean, here in Europe, the overall sentiment or narrative is that all was well and peaceful, freedom and democracy was just spreading, and then evil showed up, and usually it has to be personified by Putin or Xi Jinping, and it has to be confronted, must be destroyed, and then peace somehow can return. I mean, this is a very childish way of saying that they want hegemony back. And I guess I say childish because there's no strategy in terms of what they want to achieve, how they can achieve it, means that's required. It's just this emotional outburst and slogans about what is unjust. And as our hegemony was so virtuous, everyone was benefiting. But you see, this is a problem that
A lot there, and most of it it's also true. It's true that they're being biased, that if Russia or China would put weapons or military or any kind of force in the Mexican border or the Canadian border, the US has the right to be angry. NATO has been doing the same for 30 years, poking the bear, using the fear mongering, the evil, the Hitler, whatever, and all that stuff to bring more fear. And then using the moral attacks from the most immoral people ever. So the most dictator, fake, hypocritical Ursula von der Leyen trying to give morally to anyone. Like you have no right to have any kind of moral statement or say anything or take any kind of high ground. Nothing. You have no morals. Most leaders have no morals. Zelensky, Putin also, all of them. And Netanyahu and all of these, oh my God, you are hurting people just by saying things, killing people. Like, you have no morals. First, work on your personal morals and your values. And then, once I can see consistency, that you are a good person or the good person you are forcing the rest of us to be according to your eyes, then you should be at least as good. If you're not, shut the fuck up. So, you know, people who are pro-Ukraine might be pissed at me, or my Ukrainian friends, which I have many. However, I'm looking at the facts. I'm trying not to be emotional, and all of this, what it has been said, it's completely true. This does not excuse Putin to do anything he has done, or invade, or kill people, all that stuff. 100%, that doesn't mean I support it, or agree, or anything. Again, as I said yesterday, the definition of terrorism, I think that Russia and the Russian military and Putin is a terrorist organization or terrorist government, like most governments. That's a problem, actually.
problem, the inability of our actual political leaders to address the critical time we're at, and why we need to essentially find a new status quo, or is it the inability to let go of hegemon? Is it just that the rules are changing? I mean, how can we explain this?
Yeah, I completely agree with your assessment. Before, this idea of the liberal, rules-based national order.
Something important is in support of the Ukrainian people. The Ukrainian people are the real victims here when it comes to this, what I just mentioned. Because if let's put the other example that Russia and China activates Mexico, or Cuba is a good example, and that's one of the reasons the Cold War was fought, because of these missiles in Cuba and shit. So if that happens, then America invades, or like Russia is doing, and then kills Cubans. So China and Russia in this scenario are also not the victims. The same that US and Europeans, or the Western Europe, like the European Union, is not sacrificing any of their people. I mean, as we mentioned already, you have the UK Prime Minister and French high military ranking officers saying, prepare for your children to die for Europe or whatever, for NATO or something. So we will see where that goes, but the Ukrainians are the real victims here. And yeah, I just hope it stops as soon as possible.
Order. It's basically these Western nations bullying, exploiting, and colonizing the rest of the world. So for 20 years, NATO was expanding into Russian sphere of influence. And for 20 years, Putin has been warning NATO, you have to stop, otherwise we have to react, we have to protect our sovereignty. And NATO refused to listen. NATO was extremely arrogant, and that forces Putin's hand. Then China, for the longest time, was basically the factory to the world. And China agreed to produce really cheap products to the world, which increased people's standard of living. And that made Western consumers really happy. But then came the 2009 financial crisis, when basically because of speculation, because of stupid policymaking, because of greed, the Western economy collapsed. And so what happened was that the Western central banks demand that China invest in infrastructure. And so for the next 10 years, China was digging itself into a hole with all this infrastructure spending. And eventually China decided we don't have enough resources to continue all this spending on infrastructure. And now the American economy has collapsed because the American consumers have maxed out their credit cards. The American consumers have been exploited for the past few decades, and they can no longer afford to spend any more money. So now what America demands is that Chinese consumers start spending money. Chinese consumers start maxing out their credit cards, and that China liberalize its financial markets. And China says, we will not surrender our sovereignty. And so China's being bullied by America. Under the first Trump administration, they started to levy all these tariffs on China. And it's continued under the Trump administration. And America insisted on all these bullying tactics, for example, denying China access to technology, to markets. A few years ago, the Huawei executive, Meng Wanzhou, she was arrested transiting in Vancouver, and she was put under detention for a number of years until she was finally let go. So for the longest time, America and its allies were able to bully the world. And over time, Russia and China have stood up, and Europe and America don't like that. And that's the world we live in today.
Well, I feel like we watched this movie before to some extent, though. That is before World War.
Yes, all of that is also kind of true, I guess. Some he's also hyperbolic on some other things, but it is definitely true that besides all of the wars, hot wars underground, there are high speculation of a huge financial crash next year, worldwide one. Not only in the U.S. Well, I mean, in 2008, the U.S. financial crash did have some repercussions in Europe or in the developed Asian countries, Singapore, Japan, etc., South Korea. However, not to the scale that people are expecting. People are expecting a world, they're calling it the AI bubble, the world bubble, where AI is gonna start developing faster than it's already developing way faster than we think. People who think I have 3 years, they actually have 6 months to find something else to do. The ones that know are gonna get replaced. This is gonna happen faster than we think. We're gonna have massive amounts of unemployment, and this should be happening 2026, 2027. And on top of that, $330 trillion in debt, the transition from the dollar to brics. Many countries and many normal people are gonna transition. The dollar is gonna go to shit. Like, things are happening. It's the Bitcoin bear year. So every 4 years, Bitcoin has a bear year where it cuts down, and experts are expecting down to 20, 25, 30,000. So yeah, financially, the future is also, or next year is also not looking very bright, sadly.
World War I, we saw with the rise of Germany that it effectively outgrew the British-dominated system. So again, a shift of power. The British hegemon was declining. Germany as a regional power increased. So in 1871, for example, Britain produced twice as much steel as Germany, which was a good indicator of economic power. And 22 years later, by 1893, the German steel production had already then surpassed the British. And by the time World War I broke out in 1914, German steel production had doubled that of Britain. So that's a very short period of time for the whole relationship to be put on its head. Now, you can say power shifts up and down, but this is quite critical, because the whole European security architecture then was still British dominated. So you have then Germany producing twice as much steel, yet all its major waterways, that is outside, internal in Germany, are patrolled and controlled by the British. It doesn't really make much sense. But it seems, after World War II, we saw the same. The Germans outgrew the regional security architecture. And I was wondering, do you see this historical patterns? Because we have a similar thing now. I mean, the Chinese economy has been the biggest in the world in terms of purchasing power parity since 2014. While in Russia, we had after the Cold War, we decided let's develop a European security architecture where they wouldn't have a seat at the table because we thought they're weak. They're only going to get weaker. We're going to manage their decline. That would be the new Europe. So another Treaty of Versailles, essentially. So, but now we ended up in a situation where the Russians reversed, and now they have the largest state, its largest economy, territory, population, military. Yet they're supposed to be the only country in Europe which doesn't have a seat at the table. So all these red flags should be going up. I feel that this system is not going to produce stability but war. But yet again, we can't even discuss this. I mean, if you listen to the European politicians and their stenographers in the media, it's just, well, we have freedom and democracy, and Russia want empire, and then this is it. It's just a good old-fashioned good versus evil. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. But do you see a historical?
Yeah, but he's also oversimplifying something that is overcomplicated. The average person doesn't really care about who is at the table. This is they don't people first. This is way too deep. This guy just went deeper in the rabbit hole that we are willing to follow, cause we just want the people to be happy, man. The population. We're just rooting for the normal people. Governments, military, they have way too much power. It's not fair. It's not a fair fight between us, the population, and our leaders. They are against us. We don't want to have this fight. We want to live in peace. But they are fucking insisting on fighting us and on taking away our freedoms and our money and our shit. So when it's enough, that's the problem. I would pay my taxes as long as, let me be free, let me say what I want. And if I break any laws, of course, I'm not saying anarchism, but dude, it feels that I'm paying you taxes so you can use that money against me. It's not the way anybody wants to live, and that's the base of my conversation. If Russia doesn't have a seat at the table in the EU, who gives a fuck? Like, this guy, this is like for extremely political professionals or really real journalists, not me. I just talk the language of the people, so we don't care much about that, what he said, I guess.
Continuity on some other levels?
Look, I mean, for the past 20 years, Great Britain has been the chief instigator of wars throughout the world. You go back to World War One, and one of the great injustices of that war was that Germany was forced to accept all guilt for causing the war. When, in fact, you could argue that Britain had more to do with the cost of World War One than Germany did. Okay, and the reason why is that Britain subscribes to an idea called the Mackinder Heartland thesis. And the idea is that Britain is a small country with very little manpower, but it controls the seas. So in order to maintain its hegemony, it needs to create as much chaos and conflict within the Eurasian continent as much as possible, because if a major power to arise in the Eurasian continent, whether it be France or the Ottoman Empire or Germany or Russia, then it would unite the Eurasian continent by railway, and it would negate sea trade, and so Britain would collapse economically, militarily, demographically. And so for the past 20 years, Britain has been sowing as much chaos as possible throughout the Eurasian continent. So you go back to the Napoleonic Wars, when Britain sponsored, financed 7 major wars against France. Napoleon had basically conquered the continent by the Battle of Austerlitz. Austria and Russia were soundly defeated, but Britain was still working behind the scenes, financing wars, because Britain could not afford for France to consolidate Europe and create a continental system, which is what Napoleon wanted. And then you fast forward to Germany in the same situation. So Britain cannot allow any power to emerge in Eurasia. And today, America subscribes to the same concept where, as you say, there's a parallel between what happened before World War I between Britain and Germany, and now between China and America, where China is a manufacturing superpower, and it needs all these resources from South America. And South America has something called the lithium triangle, Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. And that's about 50% of the world's lithium, which is crucial for EVs, for AI, for the future, basically. And so China has been invested heavily in South America, building roads, building infrastructure. There's this mega port that is building in Peru to facilitate trade. And South America has been very receptive and welcoming of Chinese investment.
Yeah,
But
they bring money.
America cannot
They don't bring
allow China to continue to rise, and that's why
discrimination.
America is going to use its sea power to disrupt global trade, right? So we've seen American troops boarding this Venezuelan oil tanker, but there was also this Chinese ship headed to Iran, and it was boarded as well. So this is just blatant piracy.
We didn't know
America,
that.
for the past 50 years, says that we will defend global trade, and now America, in order to defend its empire, in order to weaken China and Russia, is now resorting to global piracy, basically.
What is interesting about the end of World War One, though, is every historian, well, more or less every historian, recognizes that the Treaty of Versailles, put in place at the end of the war, set us on a path to a second World War because it didn't create a sustainable place for Germany in the new Europe. However, if you would say that Germany was provoked to start World War II, then you're a Nazi sympathizer. So it's very strange because it's more or less the same thing. But I think it speaks to the mentality that if you
I'm not gonna get into World War II. Like, we are trying to figure out, this conversation is what's gonna happen next year. Are we gonna have a World War III? And yeah, I get the context of the UK, they're warmongering, blah 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 blah. I get why he has to go there. However, this doesn't bring us, it's just another finger pointing. Oh, he's a warmonger. Yeah. Alright. Now what? What do we do with that? Destroy England? What do you like? I don't see what's productive about this part of the convo.
recognize something, you acknowledge it, then you legitimize it. It just feels like we're a little bit back there at the moment because the Russian invasion, it couldn't possibly be more in the provoked. This was provoked in every way, but and you can easily prove this, but you're not allowed to say it because then you're legitimizing the invasion, and of course you have to be cancelled immediately. But I thought the Eurasian Heartland comment.
Yeah, I think everybody can agree that the censorship is bullshit, and yeah, it's one of the main topics now, especially in the civil war that's happening in the Conservative Party. I love saying that. I will never stop saying that it's a civil war because I find that hilarious, and it's also true. So, and you have this, again, free speech, which is what I support, absolute free speech with the exception of calling for violence, which is normally already in the law of each country. So countries like Germany are now having laws official. So when you say free speech except for breaking the local laws of the country, well, now Germany has a law that says that if you say something, the UK has a law that says that if you post on Facebook, you go to jail. So doesn't matter the subject, doesn't matter World War II, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, doesn't matter the subject, we should be able to talk about everything. And crazy people should be able to say crazy shit. They should be able to support Hitler, they should be able to support Putin, because it's freedom. And then they should have arguments. And if you really are against Hitler, against Putin, you should know your arguments, and your argument should win. The truth should win, not emotions and finger pointing, who's the asshole and racist. This doesn't bring the conversation forward. And the more you censor, the more the conversations get stagnant. And we are stuck as a society. Or, worse than stuck, gets worse.
Comment was interesting, though. As you said, it derives to some extent from the Napoleonic system when they wanted to consolidate Europe, cut off the British as a maritime power, and then that would destroy them. So this kind of made the British convinced that you just have to keep the European powers divided. Of course, 120 years ago, this came into a more cohesive theory in terms of Mackinder. But in the 19th century, the British were fighting Russia as a potential hegemon of Eurasia. And in the 20th century, the American security strategists also referred to the heartland theory because they saw, they also saw them as the maritime power versus the Russian land power. But today, though, Eurasia is not hegemonic, and while the goal in the past was primarily to split the Russians from the Germans, always to push them out to Asia. This is why we did the Crimean War against the Russians as well in the mid-19th century. But now, when you push Russia into Asia, it doesn't push it into economic backwaters. It pushes it straight into the arms of the largest industrial power and technological power now in the world, which is China, at least one of the two. So it's a very different setting. So how do you assess this new Eurasia? I mean, one shouldn't overestimate the ability of them to harmonize their interests and work cohesively, but there is a commonality, though. The Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, I mean, the Iranians, many of them have competing interests, but none of them wants to be dominated by maritime power anymore. So how do you see this impacting, or does it impact this path to World War III?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So, the Mackinder-Hardman thesis is something that's described to both by the American Empire as well as the British Empire. And so what's happening is that because of American aggression, because this financial system where the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, which gives America exorbitant privilege, which is, say, you can print $38 trillion and not have to suffer anything, and the rest of the world has to absorb this debt. It's driving the BRICS countries and Iran into each other's arms. So the great nightmare for the Anglo-American Empire is an alliance between Russia, Iran, and China. And of course, India will also come into this alliance eventually at some point because it benefits India. And this creates the Eurasian trade continental system, right? And Iran is the key because Iran's the pivot, it's the center of the world. All these trade alliances run through Iran. So the Europeans have something called EMAC, the European India Middle East corridor. Russia has something called the North-South corridor. China, of course, has a Belt and Road Initiative. So Iran is the key. And that's why America is intent on regime change in Iran. America cannot afford for this alliance to take shape, to manifest itself, because then America would lose trade access in the Eurasian continent. China, Russia, and Iran can just trade amongst themselves and then provide energy and food and manufactured goods to the Middle East, to Africa, to Europe. And then America is stuck with $38 trillion in debt, and the America Plaza scheme would collapse. So for this is a life and death struggle for America. And so what it needs to do is go into Iran and make sure this alliance cannot take shape. It doesn't have to win the war, but it needs to create as much chaos as possible. And that's why I think in 2026 we'll see an escalation in rhetoric and conflict between America and Iran, with Israel as of course as a pit dog for the American empire.
It's funny when the complexity of this geopolitics has to be sold to the public. It's sold in the most absurd ways, such as, well, we want to have more women rights in Ukraine. Sorry, women rights in Iran. Like, this is apparently what drives the great power rivalry. But to what extent? Sorry.
No, I mean, like, you look at this Pawnee Beach tragedy where 16 people were killed. And
Okay, and I think we can skip this because this is the conversation is kind of complex, because if you don't support the women's rights for the Iranian women or for Islam, Muslim, or this kind of Sharia law argument, it's very difficult to take people serious when they don't really care about, like, nobody does anything. You complain, but do you know anything about have you read the Quran? You're actually criticizing it a lot, and you're so worried about women's rights. Have you been there? Like, you watch even documentaries about it, how many women are killed or repressed. Nobody knows shit. Nobody knows anything about it. You just hear it and say, oh, that's horrible, and then repeat it without, I'm not saying that it's not true, but they don't know if it's true. They haven't done the research. So you're just repeating shit for no reason. And using this as an excuse, the West, like, I haven't heard it in a while, so I don't think it's used a lot anymore. Not a lot of people go like, oh, Iran, because of poor women. Now it made a small, slight jump to nuclear weapons, right? A bit more important, I guess.
And we know that the person who committed the crime was an Islamic State sympathizer. And already they're pinning the blame on Iran. Why is Mossad involved in the Singapore police investigation? I mean, it seems as though they're looking for every
We
single
spoke about
pretext
that.
to create public anger at Iran.
Yeah. Well, a key problem as well.
No, it's not a pretext to create public anger at Iran. Israel doesn't give a shit about public anger. Otherwise, they would stop doing genocide in Palestine. They did it so they can have an excuse to go to war again. What the fuck, the public interest or the public opinion? They don't give a shit about that. They just want to go to war with Iran. As I said yesterday, or no, at the episode with Bondi Beach, in Nigeria, you have a Jewish person stubbing the toe on the table. They blame Iran. They're using any excuse. It's not about public opinion.
You look at the previous two world wars, if you're going to look towards hopefully not the third one coming, it's also been the assumption that the wars could be limited. Again, by definition, they had this chain reaction that one thing led to another. I mean, I remember at university when I was teaching causality, I would use World War I as an example. This leads to this. Nobody wanted to go down this path, but much of it seems to be based on the premise that they're able to limit the wars. In other words, it's this illusion of escalation control. We see some indications of this in Europe today. That is, the Europeans say, oh, we can send some troops to Ukraine. The idea is we can just tip the scales a bit towards Ukraine's favor to rebalance it and then stabilize the front line so we can keep the war going. But it's it seems like the delusion, the fact that they will be able to control this, and somehow that the Russian responses to Europeans entering the battlefield, and then let's just contain the war to Ukraine and Russia. Europe should not be a part of this war. We're just sending troops and weapons and the targeting. But how do you see this in a wider historical context, and what we're seeing in the world today, though? I know that's a
Yeah.
very big
So
question. And it's
look,
wide.
look. Yeah, I mean, but it's a common pattern in history where all wars started out as limited wars where one party is trying to achieve certain strategic objectives, and it always escalates into a full-scale war beyond anyone's control. Okay, there's the idea of mission creep. So think about Vietnam, where at first America was just sending in some advisors or trainers into
Okay. I didn't know
Vietnam
this.
to bolster the South Vietnamese regime, and eventually it escalated to the point where the entire American military was involved in a full-scale war in Vietnam.
Talking about Cambodia and Thailand, I think that's what they just did in Cambodia. They just sent some negotiating PR, whatever kind of diplomatic group, and now the war has escalated. So you begin to wonder after they do it 100 times.
So I think one major flashpoint that we should look at is Venezuela, right? Because Trump is very clear. Trump is saying that, I'm not going to declare war. This is just a operation to destroy drug cartels. Because
Major
Maduro,
rug pull.
he is a drug kingpin, and we will make sure we are trying to save as many American lives as possible. Okay, so that's just the rhetoric for public consumption. We all know that Venezuela
So
has
many
the world's largest
American
proven
lives
oil reserves,
have ended
and
because of Venezuela.
Trump is trying to
Several, but more because of the Tren de Aragua situation, because they killed people and terrorized communities in Colorado and other states in the United States. But I'm talking about the Cartel de Soles and this specific fentanyl narco-terrorism argument. The numbers have to be in the zero levels.
make Venezuela into an economic vassal. Okay, so you would think that this war would be only limited to Venezuela and America, but this war has the potential to escalate very quickly because Cuba and Nicaragua would be on the next hit list after Venezuela. Also, if you're Brazil, you would think that the real target is you, because what happened was that before the trade war between China and America, America was providing China's soybeans. China imports a third of its food, and it used to get most of its soybeans from American farmers. And because of the trade war, China started to import soybeans from Brazil. And ever since then, the economic relationship between Brazil and China has only improved dramatically. And so China right now is Brazil's biggest trade partner. And this is true for every nation in South America. So if you're a South American nation, first of all, you're outraged at the fact that Trump is trying to conduct regime change in Venezuela. You don't like the Yankees. You've had this long history where the CIA plots coups in your nation, killing millions of people. You also want to maintain good trade relations with China because
killing millions. Yeah, it wasn't even hundreds of thousands. I don't know if it was tens of thousands. I know that thousands died in the coup. How many have died in the last 20 years, 25 years of communism regime under Chavez and Maduro, including violent deaths, including criminals, including in the millions. Maybe. I think you have to this is a huge hyperbole. It's not even. It cannot be even close to millions. Millions left the country. Millions left communism to start over and clean toilets and be freezing cold, live in the Caribbean paradise for the fucking snowy mountains to escape communism. In the millions. So, yeah, those are the real millions that we should focus on. The victims, they're overdoing it also. Again, I'm not pro-Venezuela, pro-US. I'm Switzerland here. I'm just following on the facts, and it's not millions.
It's trying to actually puts real investment in your country. They build roads,
over-victimizing.
They build good infrastructure.
The same techniques on both sides.
Of your ordinary citizens.
Everybody's the victim.
Wants to take that away.
Venezuela, poor victim.
This war could escalate to a point where, okay, maybe American ground troops in Venezuela, but Brazil and other nations covertly send troops to reinforce the Venezuelan regime because they know that if Venezuela falls, they all fall together. So it's a lake of gasoline right now.
Okay, so Venezuela would have a chance because of the support.
The U.S. attempting to restore its dominance in Latin America, it fits within this shift of power as well, because if it's a multipolar world, the main priority then should be that is there's a rival great powers. You want to control your own backyard. And of course, a lot of these countries have very bad history with the US, well, dominating them. But so you can see how this could spiral out of control, and indeed why countries like China, Russia would want to at least defend their interest and relationships there. But you see because you mentioned the possible war now against Iran as well to knock out this central piece in this new Eurasian constellation. But what is did you see this a similar path there in terms of that war spreading, getting out of control? Because whenever one wants to sell these wars, it's always so nice and limited. We just want to get rid of a narco cartel. Everybody wins. It's a positive sum game. In the Middle East, it's we just want to deliver some freedoms and prevent them from getting nuclear weapons. Who would oppose us? This is by nature, if you want to sell a war, it has to be benign. So you don't see you delude yourself as to some.
All the wars they sell is for a moral cause. All the wars they sell is to improve the lives of women in Iran, or bring democracy in Iraq, or whoever is suffering in this place. So let's kill everybody so they stop suffering. Oh, where's the proof that these people are suffering? Never mind that, man. We're on the way already. It's all a lie. Of course, the only real reason that all of these wars are engineered and kept alive, and that all these people die, is for power and money. Everybody gets a cut, everybody gets networking, more power, more money, more contracts, and when all of that ends, the money, the power, and the networking stops flowing. That's why they have to keep the machine going and going.
To some extent in terms of where this is going to spiral out of control. But do you see other great powers or regional powers being pulled into an Iran war?
Well, I mean, the reality is that China gets most of its oil from the Middle East. So if there's a war, the Strait of Hormuz would be closed down. And that would create economic chaos throughout the world, especially Southeast Asia, which depends.
This guy speaks, well, I'm the one to talk with my accent, but the Strait of Hormuz, I think he meant. And yeah, Iran is very proud. Apparently, during the 12-day war, Russia offered help, and he's like, "Nah, we got this. Don't worry." So if it comes to the point where Iran is about to fall, is Russia and China gonna intervene? I think so. I would put good money on that. I don't necessarily say, not necessarily in like bringing troops to the ground, but more like the US is doing like to Ukraine, giving them weapons, sharing intelligence. If they're not doing the intelligence part, I guess they always are, but more like sharing, giving weapons, giving aid, etc., etc. Troops, it's another form of escalation, and that's how we get to World War III. When Chinese troops, Russian troops are in Iran fighting against Israel troops, NATO troops, and American troops, that's World War III. Let's hope it doesn't get there.
Korea, South Korea, Japan, and China, which depend on most of its oil from the Middle East. And Ukraine is not that far away. So, I mean, it's possible we have a domino effect where, I mean, I'm just hypothesizing, okay? I'm just showing how all these things are interrelated. So America is bogged down in Venezuela, and Israel attacks Iran. Iran, to defend its interests, will shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And then America will send in ground troops to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Russia helps Iran by pushing to Odessa, which forces the Europeans to defend Odessa. Basically, the European nations have to go full adult male conscription to defend Odessa. They don't have enough manpower as it is. Maybe Japan and China start to exchange heated rhetoric. Okay, so the world is interconnected, and it could be a situation where one flare up in one part of the world escalates to other parts of the world.
But in terms of the main two economic players, though, one often look at the whole idea of two serious trap. That is to assess the more likely conflict between the U.S. and China. That is, I think the pathway to World War III is between NATO and Russia is well underway. But given that the main shift in international system is the U.S. hegemon having disappeared, that is, the U.S. no longer has a comfortable seat at the throne anymore. It's not the Russians. They're not that powerful. Indeed, as the new security strategy suggests, the Russians shouldn't be considered a threat to the U.S. The main, well, one has to use the word threat, but at least challenge to U.S. primacy, obviously, is China. Now, this is why also the new nationalism emerging in the US suggests that, everything, we're going from strength to strength, everything was good, who took away from us, was it China? This is what where the ugly nationalism come from. But but how do you see this playing out? Because a key concern now in the United States is that they can't compete anymore with China economically. Now, well, they do have the superior army though, or the military. So do you see too many incentives now to transition or escalate from an economic war to a military conflict? Or how do you see the possibility now of this being, well, if not a trigger, a big part of coming World War III?
Look, the national security strategy is very clear about China. The goal, the long-term goal, is to economically strangle China, because China depends on trade for its resources, right? So the idea of the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine is to cut off China from China trade off from South America, right? So now you have all these American warships patrolling the South American waters, and so China will not be able to extract copper and lithium it needs for its AI and EV industries. It will no longer be able to import food and oil from South America, okay? So that's part one. But even in Africa, Trump and America will challenge China. China has been for the past few decades investing very heavily in Africa, building infrastructure, creating good relations with African nations. China has a solid relationship with many African nations. But in its national security strategy document, it says very clearly that America will now work with its European and Japanese allies in order to help build up Africa, because Africa is the future. You just look at demographics. Africa is the youngest continent, and it is the fastest growing continent. So, and the national security strategy says very clearly that before, America was too focused on ideology, on spreading liberalism, democracy, and now it's purely self-interest, purely economics. So basically doing what China does, but America says that, well, we have better products, and we will use the full resources of our allies. So basically, to counter China, first of all, what America will do is strangle China economically, so cutting off trade. That's number one. Number two is that it's going to see the resources of its allies, mainly Japan and South Korea, as their own. It's going to see the wealth of Japan as something that is like a tool for America to use against China. And the third thing that America's going to do is promote divide and rule, where it may back off militarily in the Southeast Asia, but it's going to encourage Japan to create greater conflict with China. And we're already seeing that, where for the past few weeks, China and Japan have had a bitter exchange of rhetoric. And we can expect a great escalation of that in the next few months.
That's a very unfortunate message to send to China. That is, if China wants to.
Yeah, it's not looking good, guys. It's looking like this is my like if I were to put all the pieces together, it feels, and simplify it to explain it to a 5-year-old, I would say like America is losing grip as the leaders, the kings of the world, as the main empire, the biggest empire, most powerful empire of the planet, and slowly they are realizing that China and Russia and that the other team is slowly gonna win. It's gonna win, and every day they can stop it less. So I don't think it's stoppable anymore. I think this is the way that it is, and the only hope that we have is that America and the West don't go. They don't want to go out with a bang. Let's put it that way. That they realize it and then accept sharing power and accepting that everybody's powerful and we can all take care of our people. There's enough for all of us. Let's just trade. Or if they keep this thing of insisting on being number one, then we're gonna have a very, very intense World War III. So it's all about my hopes are not high. It's all about, can America and the West be a bit humble and accept that they have to share the power? That's the question. If the answer is yes, we'll have peace. If the answer is no, we'll have World War III. And if the answer is no, which it looks like it's no, because they are invading Venezuela just for that purpose, they don't want to share what Venezuela has with China. They want it all for themselves. So the signs are there that they are not willing to share the power, and it's looking bleak next year. So I will start getting ready wherever you are geographically. Buy food. If you are more mobile, if you're fixed that you own a house, you have family and stuff like this, buy food. Maybe if you have a garden, try to make a hole in the ground in your garden and use it for food storage or something. Or if you have, of course, a cellar, whatever, at home. And if you are more mobile, then start planning, and you live in any of these countries, then I would start planning to move to a more neutral country for the time being. Who knows how long this is gonna last, but if there is actual war, that I would assume 5 years, and then how long after that. So I'm sorry for the shit news, guys, but it seems like we're gonna have to get ready, unless some miracle comes and the West decides to admit that, hey, I'm not the one with the biggest dick anymore. Hey, we all can share everything. Low hopes, though. Low hope. Do you have high hopes? Please let me know. And also share and like. Let me do this in some here. Share, like, subscribe, comment. Don't forget, please. And yeah, I'll shut up. Let's keep moving.
To continue to have trade with the world, then it better build itself a very powerful military to be able to actually defend its trade partnerships from the US. No, so you can, well, again, this is another, I guess, comparison with the First World War and Second. That is, you have these rising industrial powers competing, and then, of course, unavoidably, almost the military as an instrument will join in on the mix. But your point there, though, is interesting, because if the US just wanted to deter and have stability, then its own army would be on the front line. That is, it has the most credibility. I mean, if you want deterrence, you need to have that clear credibility, capability, and communication. But if you want to go into a hot war, you don't want to be on the front line. You want a proxy. You want to send in the Kurds to fight the Iraqis. You want to use the Ukrainians to weaken the Russians, and I guess you want to throw in the Japanese to fight the Chinese. But is this what you're seeing? And do you see this other places as well?
This is not the British dish. This is just divide and rule. This is what empires have been doing for centuries. So yeah, I mean, Japan and South Korea will now be the cannon fodder in this great struggle between China and America, and we're already seeing that. Unfortunately, because you have tens of thousands of American troops in Japan and South Korea, and because the leadership class, the elite, have been co-opted by America a long, long time ago, they're basically all assets at this point. Then Japan and South Korea will just do what they're told by the Americans.
I wanted to ask about the domestic component as well. In this, as one heads towards World War III, that is, as we've seen in the past, when a hegemon declines or any great power declines, it also manifests itself in domestic problems. That is, a state is not just one unified entity of power; it has that domestic component. So once you have the decline, you also see economic inequalities, shifts in the demographics, social fragmentation. Political polarization, the legitimacy of the government among the public, which is not performing, and often we see that war becomes kind of the solution to hold this construct together. Do you see the same, or how do you explain, or do you factor in this dynamic into your assessment? What happens with the states themselves? Because
yeah, all of that is happening, but is that the reason for the war? The reason for the war is because the West is losing power. Sadly, has nothing to do with any of us. They don't give it, like, we don't even play a role in this kind of world power, elite power grabbing, power grabbing. Redundant. So yeah, I don't think it has anything to do. Yeah, the public view is shifting, and hopefully in about 5 to 10 years we will have enough people who are red pilled to elect people in power that are also red pilled, and not people that lie to us to keep us happy and then do the opposite once they're in office. So that's gonna take time. I mean, it's good. People being red pill is just the start. However, I do see that it's gonna get worse before it gets better.
if you look at Europe and the US today, it's not the US and Europe of 20 years ago. The quality of leadership, the way they talk about the world, the priorities they make. I mean, I don't hear any European leaders today talk about peace. They don't talk about diplomacy, the need to avoid war. Everything is about we have to prepare to sacrifice our sons and daughters to fight the new great Satan. I mean, this is this is our political leadership. This doesn't happen out of nowhere. This seems to be part of the decline. Do you factor this in?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. So
I
Oswald
wouldn't.
Spengler, he had a checklist for how do you know a society is in decline. When he means decline, he means deathbed. Because in his worldview, societies are organic. They're organisms, and they're born, they mature, they die. And when they die, they scatter. Okay, so what's happening in the West? It's not decline, and then maybe a few decades from now they'll reemerge. No, it's like the deathbed. Okay, so let's go over the checklist. Number one is over-urbanization, where everyone from the countryside flocks to the city. You have these mega cities right now in the Western world. That's a problem because these cities are parasitic. They are places where people engage in luxury, in decadence, in corruption. They actually don't produce anything of value. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is People refuse to have children. People refuse to have families. The young people don't see a future for themselves. They certainly don't see a future for their children, so they refuse to have children. That's problem number 2. So you have demographic collapse. Problem number 3.
I see all of this. I get what he's going, but I see all of this as a second separate bubble. This I don't see. Maybe somebody can explain. I'm not really the smartest person in the world, but I don't see the connection between the the society, and the cultural crashing, and power, like unipolar power hegemony, like this kind of power confrontation that's happening between the West and BRICS. So I don't yeah, the West has it worse because on top of all of the problems that they are being out business and outgunned and out intelligenced and out everything, on top of that, the culture is also crashing. So that double sucks. Is that does that gonna have an influence for World War III? I don't think so. I mean, I think it's just worse. I think it just means that the U.S. is gonna lose easier, because when your people doesn't trust your government, they're not willing to fight for their country. So it's just worse for the U.S. And everything that he says is true about the deathbed and all that stuff. The culture is about to collapse, but that's culturally. That's not a hegemony of power or military power or resources. It's different, in my opinion.
Number 3, of course, is massive inequality, where you have 1%, even less than 1% actually, maybe 0.1%, who control all the resources. So in America right now, you have maybe a few billionaires who are able to buy all the assets. So you look at someone like Larry Ellison, who's able to buy TikTok. His son's able to buy Viacom, and now they're bidding for CNN, right? So you have one family that's able to control all the media.
Yeah, they have Warner Brothers, don't they?
There's massive inequality. Number 4 is that when you fight wars, you get mercenaries or barbarians to fight them for you, right? So I'm not sure when last time America fought a war and it actually used its own troops. Maybe 2003 against Iraq, but you look at Libya and Syria, it was using these proxies to fight these wars. And it's something that's happening in Ukraine, where America is using Ukrainians to fight these wars, but Americans themselves are actually not that involved. Okay. Number 5 is just general decadence, where you have like OnlyFans, where maybe 10 or 20%.
But bro, yeah, the OnlyFans shit is fucked up. But Americans fought in Iraq and in Syria, like people from the United States, active military duty soldiers, where there were American boots on the ground. So mostly they were the military of Iraq that was being trained and stuff. Yeah, maybe, but a lot of there's a lot of people that killed themselves and that had PTSD now that would disagree with this dude.
Of young white American women are OnlyFans. And I mean, that's a sign of civilizational death, if anything, right? I mean, you have these young girls who are trying to sell their bodies, and it's all legal and promoted. So there's all these signs of just civilizational decline and collapse throughout the Western world.
I don't think that's a good thing
You also
either.
have massive immigration because no one wants to work. It's not because, I mean, like, listen, you have these massive immigration because Americans are used to cheap labor, and most Americans don't want to be slaves, so that they're bringing these immigrants, and that's causing the collapse of social cohesion. So we go on and on about all these ailments facing the Western world. And war's not going to solve it because these young people are not going to go fight a pointless war overseas, right? So Germany has announced that they're considering the conscription, and young people have said, we'd rather be ruled by Putin. If you give a choice whether to fight a war, have Putin be our emperor, we prefer to have Putin as our emperor. We're happy with Putin as emperor. He's probably better than MERS. Okay, so I'm not sure how you can get these young people to fight this war. And the entire point of civilization now is
Do
that
you really? Oh my God! You see, this is hyperbole. This is the hyperbole that I mean. Do you really think if the average American or European, regardless of the propaganda, because it doesn't have to be Putin in this case, it can be anybody who comes to your country and says, hey, either you let me rule you or I'll destroy you or whatever. This is the argument of every colonizer in history, from Agamemnon until Donald Trump. So, dude, it's everybody will well, I don't know, depends. There's cowards and all that stuff, but most people would die for their country, right? So if Putin comes and threatens America to invade America, let's say, on the situation how it is now, not, because there's no real direct threat to America, even if Russia takes all of Europe. Like, it would be like, oh shit, but they haven't invaded, if that that happens, that Russian troops land in the US territory, of course everybody's gonna stand up. What are you talking about, man? Nobody would be like, no, 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 let him win. We don't mind speaking Russian in school. Dude, give me a break.
You don't have to work, and you can enjoy a good life. That's a message for the past few decades.
So so we can enjoy a good life in Russian and drink vodka. Yes, yes, no, no, no. Let the Russians in. Let them in. Let them in. Let's drink vodka. It'll all be free, camarade. Fuck you, bro. You crazy?
Toxic promotion of individual decadence and just glorifying individuality. So I mean, like the idea that you're gonna get all these young people to go die off in Ukraine or in Iran or Venezuela, it's kind of silly.
Well, it does seem that part of the strength of Western civilization in the past was the youthfulness, the being vibrant and then open, because any civilization can, may make mistakes, but it's this openness to air out your mistakes, to address them, to fix, to try out new things. All of this seems to shut down, and I think, well, part of it seems to be exacerbated by this propaganda, which intensifies. If you can put it into category of a psyop as well, because if you want to identify a nice psyop, it would be when people begin to fear what they should say, not based on what's true or not, but just what you're not allowed to say. People begin to police each other. You have this atmosphere of fear, because you're not quite sure what views are acceptable, how you might be punished if your statements you made in the past can be used against you. So social exclusion, go after reputation, ridicule. If the fear for your professional life, your personal life. I mean, this is a life in the in the West now. You can't, whether you discuss immigration, gender, foreign policy, it's very you should be very careful what you say in public. Officially, of course, we're liberal democracies. You're allowed to say what you want, but the main strength, that is the renewal, the rebirth, that is to address your mistakes and recover. I don't really see that anymore at all. I mean, I lived in Europe until the end of the 90s, and I left for 20 years and came back. This place is not recognizable anymore. This is a very different place now. I'm not sure if you see the same, I guess, aging. At least the West has exited its youth, it seems.
Well, I mean, I was in Canada for 2 months this summer, and I was shocked
Canada
by
is shit show,
how
though.
much rapidly Canada has declined over the years. I mean, it doesn't seem as though people want to do any work. As you say, they're low energy, and they sort of like, it's quiet quitting, right? The term is quiet quitting. On the problem of fear and intimidation, listen, America just announced a policy where they're considering, if you want to visit the United States, you have to list 5 years of your social media, right? And I mean, listen, everyone knows what this is about, right? Because everyone knows that this is directed at people who've criticized Israel, right? Because like, why else would they do this? And no one cares if you criticize America. No. If you have, in the past year or two, you have spoken up against genocide in Palestine, your name, all your profile is now stored on a database. Yeah, you may not know this, but it certainly is. And if you were to go to America, they will now have your biometric data, right? And now they can just cross-reference everything together. Okay, that's how scary things are. Before you thought you were doing anonymously online. But once you visit America, you give them a social media handle, and they have biometrics. Now they can be profile on you, and they can track you for the rest of your life. It's that scary today.
Let me just ask a last question, because I appreciate your warning signs of where we are probably heading. I mean, I always make the point in Europe. I think a greater war now with Russia is more likely than not. But what is then how do you identify the source of these problems? Is it
So yeah, there's a legit argument for why do politicians never apologize, and in my opinion, they shouldn't lie in the first place. But when it comes to power dynamics, apologizing does make you weaker, and not only does it make you look weaker, but it's also something for your opponents to use against you. Oh, he made mistakes before. Yeah, like all humans, you mean? But politicians have to be perfect. They cannot make mistakes, because they're gonna use against them or use in favor or whatever in the elections for the campaigning, or whatever, from the investors, from the whoever is giving money, who would like the interest, right? So I kind of understand. I don't think it's right. I think everybody should apologize, of course. I do see, like, acting as a devil's advocate, which I always try to do. I do see their perspective, and my counter argument is, don't lie in the first place, motherfucker. Try not to make mistakes, or act in the best interest. Because if you do act in the best interest, you try something and everybody sees that you tried, and you did my best and it didn't work, then you're allowed to go, we did our best, it didn't work out, But making mistakes, or having to accept that you lied, like, imagine all the politicians, Dr. Fauci and all the politicians now apologizing about COVID. We would be like, dude, then don't lie in the first place. What the fuck are you doing? That's why they cannot apologize. because they it's on purpose, you know. But even if it's a legitimate mistake, it is a sign of weakness, and it will be used against you. So that's the kind of double-edged sword that politicians and people in power have to deal with.
Is it
It's
arrogance, hubris,
Machiavellian, but
stupidity? Is it? I mean, what would be the solution here? If there is a solution
it's
to the
politics.
path or domino effect we're currently in the middle of.
So, I study history, and it's a pretty strong pattern where empires rise because they're young, they're energetic, they're cohesive, they're open, and then they peak as an empire, and they become arrogant, they become insular, they become close-minded, they're defeated by hubris, and then they decline, and then the empire dies. It's a pretty common pattern. We don't have an example where an empire declined, but then it re-emerged. Some people say that Rome re-emerged as a Byzantine empire. That's not true. The Byzantine Empire and the Roman Empire are two different entities altogether. So what's happening in America, what's happening in the Western world, it is part of the natural process of being human. The problem, though, of course, is that an empire refuses to admit its mortality. An empire refuses to die. You got all these billionaires in America who are spending all their money trying to live forever, and that's just a hubris of those in power. And unfortunately, this is what the Greeks taught us: that hubris is the greatest evil in the world. It leads us into insanity, and that's why we're living in the world that we live in today.
Yeah, well, that goes from the poem of Eliot, the Hollow Men. That is.
Yeah, that's a nice way to end, I guess. This empire cycle, right? An average of 100 years. I read often. Maybe some of you also. There's an average of 100 years time in empires around history. Let's see. It's been over 100, of course. This one depends. It actually does depend because, I mean, yeah, the early 30s or, around the 20s, after the First World War, you can say that is where the West and America starting clawing their way into being number one. But then, like when was it in the 70s when they stopped like the gold standard? When they stopped the gold standard and went for printing bonds and basically making money out of thin air, that's and also part of this. I guess I guess it's the same. It's just like second level empire, and that's what fucked everything up. So no, yeah, I would say we're around 100 years also. So what a coincidence.
The way the world ends is not with a bang but a whimper. But is this the best we can hope for then? That it doesn't go out with a bang.
Let's hope it's a whimper.
We go out the
not
Soviet way. That is just a slow, sad collapse, and hope that something new emerges in its place.
Like the Soviet Union collapse with
Look,
kind of a whimper.
America's national security strategy, it is very clear and blatant that America will defend its empire to its dying breath. And America is not retreating from the world. It's going to fight everywhere in the world, but it's going to use allies as proxies. It's going to use its allies as kind of
Sadly,
use all the
I
resources of
agree.
its allies. It's going to divide and rule. So before, America was willing to be hypocritical. It was willing to use this rules-based national order as a facade in which to project power. And now this facade has dissipated because people recognize the hypocrisy of the entire system. So America is just like, okay, now we'll just use force. We'll just be pirates. We'll just be the mafia. And so, and at the same time, the reality is that America is the world's greatest empire. We've never had an empire that's been able to control the entire world and have the technological, economic, military sophistication that America has. So this death will not be pretty. And, if we die a whimper, that would be a very good death. But I don't think it'll be a whimper. I think it'll be a big bang. And I think that this conflict may rage around the world for the next 10, 20 years. And this is the reality that we're heading towards. So the idea of maybe Trump and Putin will get together and sign a peace treaty and we'll go back to 2020. No, that's gone. We're in a brave new world. And we're never going back. This is the undiscovered country. And this is something that we all have to brace for.
Yeah, no, I think, that's another weakness
shit.
that I see in Europe. The assumption that, we'll go all the way on this one, try to break the Russians. If for some reason it wouldn't work, we can go back to the way things were. Again, this goes into the whole escalation control delusion. I don't think these people know exactly what they have started, but sadly, I think they will find out. But as always, I hope you're wrong, but I suspect you are very correct in your assessment. So.
Legit.
I hope I'm wrong too.
Yeah, we all hope you're wrong.
I would love for me to come back a year from now and Putin and Trump have a peace treaty. The world is at peace again. I'm so sorry I was wrong, and I'll never ever appear on the internet again because I'd rather spend time with my kids.
I would like that. So, anyways, thanks a lot for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Ah, man. Well, it's not looking good, guys. It's not looking good. I guess about 20 minutes before the video was ending, a little bit after half, was like the light bulb breakthrough event for me when I realized, yeah, it all has to do with, is America willing to give up the power that they are, without any question, losing and are slowly gonna keep losing? And the answer seems to be no. So I would say, of course, nothing is for sure. Like this guy says, I would love it to come back and say, oh fuck, man, it was close, right? Holy shit. Okay, now we're gonna eat some chili con carne in the can for the next 6 months because I had a lot of food. Oh man, I wish that happens. However, if I would have to bet money on it, I would bet money on escalation, aggression, and just things getting worse, sadly. So let's be ready, guys. Let's be ready. Let's pay attention. Keep our eyes open. I would also love it not to have to pay attention to the news all the time. I also have movies to watch and fucking things to do besides listening to what Trump did and if he's gonna bomb my country or not. But during times of war, we have to act like warriors, even if we don't want to. And yeah, let's be tough and let's stay together and remember to spread peace, love, understanding, empathy, be a nice person. I guess this is kind of a generalized term, but we all know what being nice is. If somebody cuts you in traffic, don't call him an asshole. Forget it. Well, whatever. Let it go. Let it go. You have a cat and that it's fucking bothering you. Imagine how unhappy she must be. So just let it go. Spread happiness. Don't spread toxicity. This is the one grain of sand that we have control over. So let's try to use it as much as we can. Anyway, thank you, gringos, gringas, spinners, spinnerettes, and everybody else who is listening and who supports. Please don't forget to like, comment, follow, fucking subscribe, share, everything. Everything that you think. Liking and comment is important because the algorithm sharing is important, so I get new eyes. And yeah, I hope to see you again later. I'm about to finish this and go straight on Thailand, Cambodia, so I'm going live in a second, and this I will release later today. And tomorrow we have the Piers Morgan debate on the podcast breakdown, and we have Burkina Faso on the news update. So don't miss any of that, and I will see you very soon. Peace.